everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you are new here, then my name is Lucy and I'm basically on my 2-week summer between my 3rd year of medical school and my 4th year of medical school, so I'm not sure what year that puts me in. Today's video is going to be about how I make my notes at medical school. I recently posted on my Instagram story asking you all what videos you want to see from me, and actually so many of you said that you wanted a video about how I take my notes, and a lot of you said that you were starting medical school this September and you want to know, like, when you sit down in your first lectures, how do you take your notes? So that is what I'm going to explain in this video. First of all, I just want to say I'm so jealous of all of you who are starting 1st year of medical school. I actually really loved just going to loads of lectures, because that's what 1st year is. It's just essentially a lot of lectures. Obviously there's not a lot of clinical placement, there is a little bit here and there, but predominantly you are in lectures, and I actually just really enjoyed it, like going in with my little notepad and just like taking notes. It was actually so much fun, so I'm so jealous. So I should probably explain that I have a few stages of note taking, so it's not like I just make one set of notes and that's it, I'm done. So I will make notes in the lecture itself, and then I will make my revision notes using the notes that I've made in the lectures, and then eventually I might end up making sort of like posters or flashcards from my revision notes. Also, I should say my notes are mostly handwritten, so the method I'm going to tell you about is if you want to handwrite your notes. However, at the end of this video I'm going to be giving you kind of like a big list of all the other methods that I know that other people use at medical school, in case you don't want to handwrite your notes. Also, if you haven't already, then I would recommend watching my other video I made quite recently about how I study in medical school, as this will sort of show you my learning process, and then I think it will become a bit more sort of like clear about my different stages of note taking. But anyway, let's get on with the video. So let's start with my original lecture notes. So a few things you should bear in mind. I know this is true for Nottingham. You will have access to all of the lectures online, so they'll probably be uploaded like a few days before your lecture happens, or maybe just like the day before. So you can go and you can look at the PowerPoint slides, you can have a read through, and the lectures are also recorded and uploaded onto that same platform, so you can re-watch the lecture and you can access the slides. Now, essentially the way that I make my notes in the lectures is highly dependent on the type of lecture, and it can go kind of down 2 different routes. So the first route is that if I have looked at the slides of the lecture and I've kind of sussed out the kind of vibe of the lecture, and I maybe think it's going to be sort of quite a slow paced, quite basic material, not a lot of new content, if it's a lecture like that, I will jump straight to making my revision notes, which I'll talk about next. And I will skip out the stage of making lecture notes first, which I'm then going to transform into revision notes at a later date. This just means that I can save time. So for the kind of more basic, simpler, slower lectures, I will do that so that I don't have to do them again and make them into revision notes, because that would just be a waste of time. If there's not a lot of new content and it's just kind of like going over things, I won't need to do that. But the majority of lectures are going to be fast paced, they're going to be quite complicated, it's going to be a lot of new information. And so the thing that I would say to any new medical student, and please listen to this, please, because it took me like 3 years to figure this out, it is not efficient, if the lecture is fast paced and there's a lot of new content, to be trying to write down everything that comes up on the PowerPoint slide and listen to the lecture at the same time. If you're doing your notes on a laptop, then trying to like format all of your notes and like put everything into boxes and copy and pasting pictures and things like that. Doing all these things like multitasking is not an efficient way to absorb the lecture, because what you end up doing is you end up so focused on whether you've written the whole slide down or whether you've put the right font in to your Word document that you're not actually taking in the information. I think the priority has to be that that lecturer is stood in front of you right there, and this is your chance to actually listen to them. And if you do listen to them properly and you really sort of take on board everything they've said, then you won't have to re-watch lectures. Your time at medical school is very precious, and you want to be using your time efficiently. You don't want to be having to re-watch all of the lectures for a second time after you've sat in them, because then you're essentially doing every lecture twice, and that's just not a very efficient way to sort of be at medical school. So what I would suggest in the majority of lectures, unless it's a really simple one like I've said and you can just make revision notes there and then just sit back, enjoy sitting in the lecture, enjoy learning this new information and listen to what the lecturer is saying. Write down in your line paper or your notepad or on your laptop what the lecturer is saying. So are they adding any additional explanations? Are they giving you sort of examples that will help you sort of recall the information later? Are they giving you any tips on how you can memorize things? Are they giving you sort of additional information that you think is really useful for you? Really listen to what they're saying and write that down. So that will mean that you don't have to rewatch the lecture. Sometimes as well, it's quite nice to just have paper in front of you so that if you feel like you're kind of like dozing off, you know, you're kind of like losing concentration because you've been sat in lectures all day, then sometimes it's nice just to like write down some really key points so that you can keep yourself focused and you can keep yourself sort of like listening and engaged. So that is my lecture notes done. So let's move on now to my revision notes. So I will come back at the end of the day after being at lectures, and my aim for the evening will basically to be consolidate what I've learned and to make my revision notes. And this is something I aim to do kind of like in the same week. So I will try to complete that week's worth of lectures in that week, just so that I'm always staying on top of it, because I don't want it to build up so that I've got like 50 lectures that I need to make revision notes for. I want to just always be sort of ticking over, making my revision notes as I go. So my revision notes are condensed, they're concise, and they're in a layout that is really sort of logical for me and easy for me to revise from. They kind of like assist my photographic memory. I don't have like an amazing photographic memory, but I do find that having stuff in kind of like boxes or in certain places on the page kind of helps me like memorize it. So basically the way that I will make my revision notes is I will look at the notes I made in the lecture and I will look at the lecture slides and I will just put both those things together. But while I'm doing that, I'll be kind of condensing out unnecessary information. So there might be kind of unnecessary like random fun facts that are interesting but I don't really need to like revise them, and there might be things that are kind of repeated a lot. And especially I noticed that this is something that happened a lot in first and second year, is that you would have a lecture and maybe the lecturer would sort of touch on something very briefly and there'd be like a couple of slides about it, and then later on in the week you'd have a whole lecture on that topic where it was really detailed, and so you don't need to kind of write that twice. So I just cut that bit out of that first lecture. And also what often happens is I remember we had lectures on strokes, and literally every lecturer that we had, even though the lectures were on different things to do with strokes, every lecture had the same like first few slides introducing like what a stroke was and like classifying different strokes, and you don't need to write that out for every single lecture, it's just the same. So it's kind of common sense really, but I just condense out things that aren't really necessary or that are repeated. However, be very careful with this, because this was one of my big mistakes in first year, is that I just kind of condensed out anything that I thought was, you know, those like details that you just like, that's so specific, it's so niche, like they're not going to examine me on that, it's just way too, you know, way too detailed. I would condense things like that out, and then I realised when I took the mock papers that those sort of things were going to be examined on, they will be included in the exams. So then I kind of had to go back through the lectures and like re-add all of those little details. So although you should condense stuff out so that your revision notes aren't just like a massive and really like hard to revise from, you don't want to just cut out things that you don't think will be in the exam, because they could be. So if in doubt, just leave everything in there, leave all the details in so that you can revise them and learn them. Put stuff in boxes, put in pictures. I often like printed off pictures and stuck them in. It took so much time, like I should have just done my notes on the laptop really at that point, but I just love handwritten notes and I really actually enjoy making them, and I enjoy revising from them a lot more than I would sort of like typed notes. So that's why I would like print my pictures and stick them in. I would draw diagrams, anything at all, tables, spider diagrams, anything that's going to help me learn the information. Just make your revision notes exactly how you want them to be so that you can revise best. People learn in very different ways, so this is the fun bit. I've always found revision notes really fun to make because it's just making them like unique to you and how you want to learn things. You can rejuggle the order of certain things so that it's in a more logical order for you. You can do whatever you like. I'm also going to talk a bit about anatomy notes because they worked a bit differently, and that's because our anatomy was very sort of self-directed when we learnt it. So we would have an introductory lecture sort of introducing us, let's say, to like the arm. We'd have an introductory lecture, and then it would be our job to go through the recommended textbook and learn it basically, and then we'd have a dissection of the arm that would be like 3 hours, and that's where we'd sort of be expected to just know like what we were doing. We'd be expected to know all the muscles and like answer questions about them and things. So make sure you're staying on top of your anatomy note taking. And what I would suggest is, again, I'm talking from personal experience of how I sort of really struggled, is I got very bogged down in thinking I have to have all my revision notes made before I go into the dissection, when realistically that wasn't achievable because we had a dissection pretty much every week and the material that we would need to know for the dissection would be quite big. Like sometimes it was like a whole chapter of the textbook, and realistically I wasn't able to make a really good set of revision notes for that whole section of anatomy, as well as keeping on top of all my lectures. So basically I learned just to prioritise reading the textbook, and I actually highlighted the textbook so that I could sort of make sure I was actively reading it rather than just like letting my eyes scan over the page. And I would take a few notes of things that I thought were important, but then when I went into the dissection I just wanted to make sure that I'd done the reading. I'd obviously make as many revision notes as I could, but if I couldn't do them all I wouldn't like rush to do them, because you don't want your revision notes to be really rushed. Basically anything that I hadn't done for that week I'd then just add that to my to-do list for the next week. And yeah, I guess I did get quite behind in making my notes for anatomy, but it doesn't really matter because you will have time to do that throughout the year. At the end of the day, if you end up making them like well after the dissection, it's still quite nice because you're getting to then revise things, go over things. If you've just like made your notes and done the dissection and then you don't look at that again until the exam, like, or until revision time, then you won't have seen that content for a long time. So it's quite nice in a way to be a little bit behind so that you're kind of refreshing your memory. Don't stress about being behind with notes, because if anything it's just going to be better revision for you than when you do make the notes. So finally I'm going to talk about using my revision notes to actually revise the content. So there's a few ways that you can then go on to use your notes to revise. The first thing that I do is when I first do some revision, so this is normally for like a formative assessment at the end of term, so not for the real end of year exam, just for sort of like a mock exam, I will revise using my revision notes, and I will take the opportunity then to go through and highlight things. So highlight the key points, highlight things I'm likely to forget, and just like I said with the anatomy textbook, when I'm highlighting I feel that I'm more actively reading rather than just kind of like skimming through my notes. When it then comes to revising for the end of year exams, the ones that do count, I will basically revise in 4 ways. So the first is that I will simply just read my notes. This is good just for like maybe a few days before the exam when you just want to kind of really quickly refresh your memory on everything, or it might be useful for sort of the beginning of revision period when you want to sort of just remind yourself of all the different topics and see sort of what ones you might need to target first. Another thing I do is blurting. I've talked about this a lot in my videos, but basically it's when I will like read a couple of pages of notes and then I will shut my notes and I will try to rewrite them just in a very, very condensed, like quick way. So maybe like in a couple of minutes I will just try to scribble down everything I can remember from what I've just read, and this just means that you're practicing actively recalling information from memory. And then I will open up my notes again and I will check whether I sort of remembered the majority of things or if I got anything wrong. That's another really efficient way of revising, and it really helps me to actually be able to recall things without a prompt. I might decide to make flashcards. This is the third thing I do. There might be some sort of bits of information that I think it's too hard for me to learn it from just like reading it or just blurting it. I might want to really sort of repetitively test myself on it to learn it best. So those sort of things I will put on flashcards, and then I will literally carry my pile of flashcards around with me, just like testing myself whenever. And finally I might sort of get a friend to test me. So I have always lived with other medics, and so often like before exams we just kind of will use our notes to test each other, and I think that's also really effective, especially because medics are really good at asking you those really challenging questions. And yeah, essentially that is my whole note-taking process and how I use my notes before exams. I'm just going to talk about some other methods that you could use, because I know not everyone likes handwritten notes, and I completely understand that. There is something very sort of slow and tedious about making handwritten notes, but I just kind of think for me it is the best way for me, like it is the way that I learn best, and I do actually enjoy the process. But for those of you who don't, then these are the other methods that I know people use in my year. So you could make your notes entirely on a laptop. So you could either do the similar method of listening to the lecture, then making some sort of notes, and then when you get home you could write them all up and format them all in a nice Word document, copy and paste things across from the PowerPoint slide. You could be extra prepared and you could access the lecture beforehand and you could copy and paste all the information onto your Word document, and then when you're in the lecture you just need to add to it, and then I guess you could sort of condense things out as you go or later on. You can then revise using your laptop, or you might print them out and then you can highlight them and underline things, do anything you want. And to be honest, using a laptop probably is the most efficient way. It probably will save you a lot of time, especially because then you can just like copy and paste pictures across, and like you can add diagrams quite easily. But for me, it's just a nightmare because I'm just not very good at formatting things, and I'm not very good at making things look really nice on a Word document. I get really like irritated when I can't like get boxes to be in the way I want them, or I can't find the right font or anything. So I'm not a fan of like formatting notes in that way. Another method that I know a lot of people use is they will basically just annotate the PowerPoint slides. So they will either print out the PowerPoint slides, or they will have them on their iPad or their laptop, and as the lecturer is speaking, they will just annotate with a pen. Or a lot of people have iPads with those like pens that you can write on the iPad with, or they'll just type with their laptop. And then I guess when you get home later, you can either write them all out, or you can put that all into a Word document, or you can just leave it as it is, print it, whatever you want. So yeah, there really are loads and loads of methods, and I think part of the challenge of medical school when you first start is finding the method that does work best for you. And that brings me to the end of this video. So I hope it was really useful, and like I said, I'm so jealous of those of you who are starting medical school. You're going to have the best time. And yeah, let me know how you end up making your notes, or if you're a medical student already, then I'd love to hear how you do your note taking, because it's really interesting to hear different people's methods. And yeah, thanks very much for watching. Remember to subscribe to my channel to join me on this journey to becoming a doctor, and give this video a thumbs up, and leave me a little comment if you like. Follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is LucyBrettX, and I will see you very soon for my next video. Bye!